Mark McCrindle is a social researcher with an international following, but we like the fact that he's here in the hills. He is recognised as a leader in tracking emerging issues and researching social trends. As an award-winning social researcher and an engaging public speaker, Mark has appeared across many television networks and other media. He is a best-selling author and influential thought leader, TEDx speaker, and principal of McCrindle Research. There's actually one thing you need to add to that list, Mark, and that's also the creator of the PSI. Can we get that onto your bio as well? Is that okay? Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Mark McCrindle.
Thank you, Anthony. And I guess there's been a few thanks already, but I do just want to say thank you, Mayor, and thanks to the Hills Shire for the commitment to this, and to Stephen and Laurie and the economic team for investing in this. You know, it's provided to us all free, this report, and it's a great investment and a great, I think, addition to the infrastructure, the intellectual infrastructure of business in this Shire that we're blessed to work in, and it's a first. No other councils that we're aware of are doing something as longitudinal and as integrated as this. And to Anthony and the Business Chamber, Sydney Hills Business Chamber, for your vision in this instrument and in carrying it on, it's to be applauded. And thanks to you for firstly filling in the survey, so many of you who did that as local businesses in the area, and for staying for this presentation. It's been quite a morning already, and here you still are. My favourite people, you know, we're the ones that stay to the very end of the credits when watching that movie, and they all roll up. You're here to the bitter end, and I appreciate it. So I have 20 minutes to talk through and to navigate our way through this 43-page report. So do, you know, read it and look at some of the analysis later on. There's a lot in there, but I just want to give us some top-line findings so we know where it's at. Of course, last year's one is available electronically as well, so you have that available also. But let's look at some of the context as we set a little bit of a scene for the PSI and where we're at. If we think about Australia at the moment, from a population perspective, there is growth, and that is a great thing, and it does drive economic growth as well. We hit a few milestones this year. We just in February got to 24 million people. First time we've added 1 million people nationally in less than 3 years. So some pretty solid demographic growth taking place. And it's another milestone this year because Sydney gets to 5 million people. And some of the fastest growing areas in the whole state, this largest state in the nation, are right here in the Hills area in the northwest. So demographic growth, and with that we've got some pretty solid economic growth as well. If we look at the number of actively trading businesses in Australia, we have more than 2.1 million of them, and so that's one business for every 11 people. Not too many nations have business backbone as a small business investment and growth like we have here in Australia. That's a big number for a nation our size, and it's increased by 1% in the last year, the number of active businesses trading. If we bring it to the state level, you've got more than 710,000 businesses operating here, which is around a third, and so the largest number of businesses obviously here in our largest state. Now, the number of business entries in this state have increased by 1.4%, which is roughly the population growth rate of this state as well. So here in New South Wales, we've got demographic growth and we've got economic growth as indicated by business counts as well. If we look at the types of businesses, so we can do a little bit of a personal comparison. Where does our business sit in the overall scheme, and indeed where do businesses in the Hills sit? Of those 2.1 million active businesses, and these are not trusts or businesses set up for structure ownership purposes, these are trading businesses. You've got the majority of them nationally are non-employing. It's sole trader, it's the owner-operator, it's perhaps a home-based business, 61% there. But of the employing businesses, if we do the breakdowns there, a quarter of all of these active businesses are what we call the micro-employers. The ABS defines those as businesses employing between 1 and 4 people. Then you've got small businesses defined as those employing between 5 and up to 19 people. And then you've got the medium-sized businesses that employ between 20 and 199, and they're 2.4%. And as for large businesses, that, you know, we hear a lot about and make the headlines, of course, in the business section of the paper, they are 0.1%. So 1/10 of 1% of all the businesses in Australia are in that large business category. Now, if we bring this to the Hills, and based on the ABS data of trading businesses in the Hills Shire, you've got a little bit more on the slightly larger side than the non-employing. So if we look at nationally, the total employing businesses, they are 39%. In the Hills, they're 43%. And of those who completed the survey, it's 79%. So we ended up with a snapshot of businesses that are, on that more active side in terms of most likely to be employing people. Well, let's think about, and I just said here, therefore 97.5% of all active businesses in Australia are in that small or micro category, employ less than 20 people. And so as for the SMEs, the small to medium enterprises, 99.9% of all businesses nationally are in that category. Sometimes overlooked, the importance and the backbone of the economy that SMEs are. Well, let's think about how they're going. Again, from a state perspective, if we look at entries and exits on every business day of the year, there are 385 businesses that commence trade in New South Wales alone every day of the working year. And if we think about businesses that cease trading, whether through failure or shutting up shop, ceasing or exiting from trade, we've got 347. So that's quite a challenge in this state when we think about that, more than one business every business day closing. If we look at the survival rates in New South Wales, we see some challenges there as well. If we were to take a survey of businesses now, regardless or representative of how long you've been trading, a mix there and a mix of the size of businesses, a sample, if it was representative of the state sample, and come back 4 years later to see how many of our businesses are still trading. The good news is that 6 out of the 10 are still operating, but 4 will have ceased trade. This is the state average there. So there are some challenges that businesses face that cause the 4 in 10 to cease trading every 4 years on average. If we track businesses from the start of their trade, let's say this was a new business boot camp we were running here today, and we come back in 4 years later to see how many of our new starts were still trading, we would find that less than half of the room would still be around. 49% make it through, so about half, we could call it that. So, and that's in a 4 year period of time. So there are some challenges there, and the survivability rates increase as the size increases from non-employing to employing. It increases, the survivability rate increases as time goes on, depending on industry. There are other elements like having an active web presence and the like, things that we would know. But let's bring it to what we can learn from the Hills PSI, because that's got some insights that'll assist us in surviving as well. Put down here the methodology of the survey, and so many of you know it because you filled it in, but it was an online survey. Essentially 21 questions made up the index. It was completed in the field in March of this year. It's the second one, as you know. We ran it last year as well, so we now have some comparisons, which is great. And the businesses had to be trading geographically in the Hills Shire LGA. 164 businesses representing businesses completed the survey, and the majority of those were the owners of the businesses. 18 different sectors were represented, and if we look at the demographics of those completing, you'll see the widespread that we had. Firstly, from a gender perspective, you've got more males than females completing the study. Now, again, because we've got it longitudinally, we can compare that to the completion rates of the survey last year, and you'll see in that orange colour very similar results this year to last year in terms of the demographics. If we move to the age, as represented by the generations, you've got Generation Y, the 21 to 35s, 11% of the completers. Generation X, 36 to 50, almost half of the completers. And then the baby boomers, 51 to 69, 41%. And then what we call the builders generation coming in after that. You do have a demographic map that we've given you, and it's got the generations defined and their share of the workforce and their share in 10 years' time, and other data to reference from a national perspective if you want to benchmark things. But let's just have a look at how that compared from last year, and you're starting to see some generational change now in the Shire, at least from those completing the survey, where we've got more of the Gen Ys and the Gen Xs filling in the survey, and therefore being a little bit active in this regard than last year. Now, there are other details of completions, and we did a lot of contrasting of that in the study that I'm not going to go into now, but the size of the business, we compared that, the industry that you're in, how long your business has been trading, longer than 10 years or less than 10 years, whether it's more a B2B or more a B2C, all of that is tracked and compared in the report. So there's lots more demographics as well. But let's get into what the PSI is. It looks at three things. It looks at the context in which we're operating, the external environment, in a sense, the conditions, the current economic and infrastructure and other conditions. It looks at performance. So this is, how have we been going? What do the financials show over the last 6 months? This is the factual stuff. How is business going across some key measures and indicators? And then it also looks at what our forecasts are, the sentiment, what we think will be taking place in the 6 months ahead. So it's a holistic snapshot of business, the context we're operating in, how we've been performing, and our sentiment moving forward. It was great to have Elliot speaking this morning because it sort of set a bit of a scene for us in all of these areas. You know, what are the trading conditions like? What's the economy like? You know, the context, the trading conditions, how are we going performance-wise nationally? And of course, the sentiment as well. It does have a material impact on business, the attitude, the confidence, the sentiment of the operators. So there are these three key categories, as you can see, and each of these categories has another 3 measures that it looks at, so 9 measures in total. And each of the measures has a couple of indicators, 7 per category, giving us the 21 different measures or elements of the survey. So that's the construct of the survey, and it's now longitudinal and comparable. Let's move to the first of these, the conditions, the context, the situation in which we're operating. You've got the economic conditions, local and national. You've got the regulatory settings, compliance policy. You've got infrastructure and locale, the local infrastructure, the business growth, the local outlook. That is the context in which we operate. Then you've got the performance, earnings, expenses and employment across those 7 indicators, as you can see. And then, so that's how we have been going, looking at the P&Ls and the financials, and then moving forward to, well, what's our sentiment? Moving from the financial facts to the outlook. And you can see the economic outlook, the cost forecast and the growth forecast there as well. That's how the PSI is constructed. So if we look at how it's scaled, it can be on the negative side, and if the performance or the sentiment or the conditions are seen to be in that negative side, it can be slowing or worse, falling, deteriorating, collapsing, you know, in the real red zone. Or on the positive side, you know, improving is just above the 0 line, then rising, advancing, and then very strong into the accelerating. Now you'll see from the results that most of the results hover around the middle areas, certainly within the -40, +40. It can extend way beyond that just based on how the metrics of the index works. But if we focus in on some of the results, therefore, we'll dig a bit deeper into the middle areas right now to look at how it's been going. So the three key categories, of course, the C for conditions, that's a -2. All the 3 categories improved since the last round of surveys. So the C is just slightly south of the 0 mark, as you can see. The performance is a positive. It's in the improving category. And then the sentiment is quite strong in the rising category. That's how the 3 categories played out, giving an overall PSI, which also places us in the positive of 11. Now, last year, it was -12. So it's moved from that slowing to the improving category, which is good news for us. And only the conditions, we have the view locally, are slowing. So some headwinds contextually facing business, but nonetheless, performance has been in the positive zone and sentiment even beyond that. This is the improvement of all of those measures since last year. You can see the conditions has improved 19 points, the performance has increased 3 points, and the sentiment has increased 23 points. So some level of optimism with the forward outlook, and the PSI has increased 23 points to this positive of 11, as you can see. So let's look at some of the results and a few insights as we move through. Firstly, let's look at the conditions and the 3 measures there. Economic conditions in the positive zone, as you can see, the regulatory settings in the negatives, and also the infrastructure and locale in the negatives. So 2 out of the 3 negative there from the context in which we operate. and that gives us the average of -2. So the particular ones there, the regulatory settings, the big negative there was the red tape and regulation requirements for doing business in Australia and in the area. And then the big weight on the infrastructure and locale was the local infrastructure provision. And as we well know, it's a work in progress. And so if we took a sentiment measure on this, there's a sense that it's moving forward. But the current realities, it's causing some strains. Let's move to the performance. How have we been going? Earnings. That's definitely in the strong category. Expenses, the rising business costs was a challenge, as was employment. The big ones weighing down those two that have fallen into the negative were the business costs, just general cost of business today, and particularly in that third one, the employment, the staff wages and on costs. One of the biggest weights on business performance over the last 6 months, the cost of employment. And then moving to the sentiment and the forward forecast, you can see that quite positive, the economic outlook, the cost forecast because particularly of those business costs, again the expense forecast, and then you can see the growth forecast pretty chipper there. So that gave us the overall PSI, as you can see, of 11. So just a few insights across each of these three main categories on the conditions, this context in which we're operating. They're all the different particular indicators, and I won't go into them in detail, but you can see the local infrastructure, the red tape, the local outlook are a little bit of a handbrake on things at the very current moment. How businesses are seeing the overall economy is in that improving and rising category. Quick contrast of businesses by employment size on their conditions perceptions, and you can see that it's those small employing businesses that are a bit more vulnerable to economic conditions and regulation and the like. They don't have the scale of the larger businesses to handle some of that, and they're more at risk because of their employment status than the non-employing. So that's how that plays out. A little bit of vulnerability, as you can see, in those smaller employing categories. Let's move to the second of these, performance. How are we actually going? What's been happening over the last 6 months? And you can see a lot in the positive side of the ledger there. Expenses are under control, staffing levels are improving, cash flow is going well, profit and particularly revenue is going well. Profit is a little bit under strain because of particularly staff wages and operational expenses. A quick contrast here on the types of businesses, whether it's B2B or B2C, and what's happening there. And you can see, sorry about some formatting issues here on the projector, but the B2Cs, the business to consumer entities are doing a bit better than the B2Bs. So some performance constraints in the B2B environment at the moment, particularly as more businesses are recognising and trying to manage the costs, which is one of the big takeouts of the PSI at the moment. And so a bit of a strain on B2B trade. And so the third area, the sentiment and the outlook and how we're going. Overall, optimistic, as you can see. The expense forecast is the big negative from sentiment, but every one of those 7 measures improved from the last PSI that we ran. So overall, things are moving forward, and particularly from an outlook, it is great. The outlook of the businesses that have been trading longer was not as positive as businesses that are newer, and so a little sense that I guess the optimism of the new starts is not exactly measured by those that have seen a few more economic cycles. They're yet to sort of be as super optimistic as the new starts. And also the over 50s, a little bit more constrained in their outlook than the under 50s. So it's just interesting looking at some of the different filters you can apply to a study like this to see, what's the long-term money, where is it putting it down, or those that have seen a few more economic cycles, not as optimistic, but still in the positive zone, regardless of size there. So a few final insights before I'm done. We ran a few other questions as part of this, and it was great to get some insights there. From the presentation last year, great comment or suggestion was made to add an NPS, a Net Promoter Score, to the survey, which we did. And a simple question, how likely would you be to recommend doing trade, operating in the Hills Shire? How is this as a place to run your businesses? Just as you would do with customers and run an NPS, how likely would you be to recommend this product, this brand, or in this sense, this business brand, this locale, to colleague or friend. And the way the NPS works is that the score comes from taking your promoters, who are the 9s or the 10s out of 10s, like the definitely's going to recommend this area as a place to do trade. And you subtract from that the 0 to 6s to give you the NPS score. Now, I should point out, and I put a little bit of some markups here, if someone is a probably, probably a 7 or an 8 out of 10, probably I'd recommend this is a place to set up trade to another colleague. We say, look, unless you're red hot, we're not going to take your vote. And as for the maybes, those say 5 or 6 out of 10, yeah, maybe I would. We say, look, that's lukewarm, and lukewarm's a negative to us. That's sort of condemnation by faint praise. We're going to subtract you from the 9s or the 10s. And so it's a very high benchmark in NPS. If you end up even at a 0, you're doing well. You've got as many 9s and 10s as 0 to 6s. And so how did it play out on the results here? Extremely positively, as you can see. We've tracked NPS across a lot of product and consumer brands. A lot of industries have them as a whole industry, and it's hard to find any that actually make it into the positive zone. On a scale of 0 to 10, how would you go here? And you can see the results. The definitelys and the probablys are really coming in very strongly there. So what was the result? Anthony said there'd be intrigue and drama. Well, there's the result. It's definitely in the positive at a 14, a very high score for an NPS. And if we just add up the definitelys and the probablys of all of those that completed the survey in the area, 78% say, hey, this is a great area. And I definitely or probably would recommend you trade or set up here as well. So great results there on the NPS. And a couple of other final things. How important is investment in innovation as part of your growth strategy in the following areas? It's the innovation theme at the moment we're hearing much about. So we thought we'd add this and just see innovation in a local context. And you can see product innovation is important, 57% saying that that's an important part of our growth strategy. But you can see in this result that product innovation is just a part of innovation. And we do need to extend that conversation beyond just looking at innovation as measured by sales of new products or services. You can see here that market innovation, how can I do what I do differently, is even more important. Systems development around the productivity of how we conduct our business, innovating systems and procedures to run better results there. The productivity itself, innovating for productivity outcomes, is getting far higher than even product or service innovation. And then the final one, service delivery, how we interact with our customers, how we connect, how we engage, how we delight and please our customers. Being innovative in our engagement and customer interaction is at the top of the pile. So it was great to see the sophistication of the views of innovation here in the local business environment, that it's not purely about R&D and new products alone, far more broad than that. And these are just those that said extremely or very important. So you can see a focus on innovation in this area in its broad sense, which I think is a great finding and a great vote of confidence in what the future will be for this area that is so innovative in a broad way. And this one, at the moment, how much of the following issues impact your business performance? And you can see these are the respondents that say, look, it has a material impact on my business. These things. You can see that the economic conditions materially impact the performance of our business. Government policy has had a measurable impact over the last 6 months of our actual performance. Red tape and compliance costs, local and national infrastructure, a third of businesses saying a material impact. So these are real things that obviously government want to hear and at all levels are listening to. I think that's one of the benefits of this PSI, is that it can make its way to those who hold the levers and can influence some of these things and respond in accordance with what we all as businesses are saying. So research like this, I think, is a real leverage point. It's a communications point and helps show the terrain in which we operate, the contours, and can give some advice in a policy area. Now, just comparing that to last year's results, you'll see that each one of those has gone up from the last year's measures as defined there in orange. So these are real issues, and we are happy to say that there is support by the local government here in the Hills and obviously beyond that to the state and federal, and it'll make its way through. And so the final thought, there was some qual conducted as part of this, well, in the survey, some open-ended questions. So just some key insights, and again, you've got lots of pages in the back of the report that unpack this, but some of the key and indicative comments that came through. Obtaining and maintaining clients is a challenge. Gaining new clients, a lot of noise, a lot of positive talk, but actually, getting someone over the line, securing it is a challenge. Staffing, onboarding of appropriate staff to assist in growth management is a challenge in the area. Attracting and particularly retaining and funding staff, talent in the local area is definitely on the radar. Traffic and parking, traffic delays, commuting to and from work location. It's a given in this area. I think we all understand that and feel the pain of that. Availability of office space, looking for suitable premises to open second branch in the hills, starting to fill up. And depending on the size of space you're after, it's not that easy, such has been the growth of businesses here. And then just some infrastructure like internet. So hoping for that NBN to come to the business park and some of the business areas sometime soon. So some great findings that came through, even the open-ended, and again, I thank you for it. That's a quick snapshot of it, and we might have time for some questions, but once again, thanks for your participation and your interest in the